Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my podcast. As always, this is Logan, your host of Auras of the Big Sky. Today, I sit down with Amber Taylor from Soul Sonic Sound Therapy. Follow along for more.
Sounds good. So then I guess we'll jump right into it.
Okay.
And if you want to tell me a little bit about yourself and your business, and then we'll go into your background.
Okay. So my name's Amber Taylor. I own Soul Sonic Sound Therapy in Helena, Montana. I also own a studio called the Om Dome, a modern temple. My business is a mix of massage therapy. I've been a massage therapist for 17 years and started doing that in Seattle. And sound therapy and yoga. I do some breath work and meditation. All of it is really kind of based on energetic and physical healing, really, both for the body and for mind and spirit. So that's kind of the general overview of what I do, and I kind of do those things by themselves, and I do a lot of mixing of those. I've also recently started channeling. I think that's or some sort of mediumship that's fairly new to me in the last couple of years. So I'm still learning about what that is. That's just come to me kind of out of the blue. But it is part of what I do. I channel voice, what's called light language. This is according to all my other woo-woo friends. I don't have any real specifics for it, but light coding or light language is what comes to me when I get the messages. And so I do that both in my sound sessions, mostly in my sound sessions, and sometimes in other stuff I do. So that's kind of the basics of what I do.
Yeah. No, I love that.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about your background and how you started to get into those kinds of practices?
Yeah, when I read that, when you kind of sent that over, it was interesting because I think that this is more than my background and being my interest. It's just always been a little bit of who I am.
Mhm.
And so I think the world that I've been interested in or lived in has always had some of those elements. My mom was a super hippie, and we kind of traveled all over the place, lived all over the place. And I grew up having crazy intense nightmares all the time. And now I understand that, that was a little bit more messages from the universe coming through. I didn't know that at the time. But I had a lot of kind of, stuff going on in dream world when I was young, and very, very energetically sensitive when I was younger. And so I've just that made me feel a little crazy when I was little. And so, I would say I started seeking out some of the, some other information to help me with it at a fairly young age. Probably in high school is when I started to really look at it.
Yeah.
And then in college, I played a little bit with Buddhism and some meditation with Buddhism. And then I really found yoga at age 20 and kind of dabbled a little bit, and then became very serious, in the yoga world. So that was probably my first serious kind of dive into spirituality, was in that direction.
Yeah.
So I've been practicing for that long. I'm 47 now, so it's been a while. And all different kinds of yoga I've practiced, and studied some of the different lineages, and now I kind of just do my own thing with it, mixing it with all these things.
Totally.
But so yoga probably was my biggest and first kind of deep dive. And most of that was just to help me, manage how I was living in this world, being so sensitive, I think. Really. Yeah.
Yeah. When you look back at those times, do you have a specific memory or moment where you were like, okay, yeah, this feels right. This is what I want to continue doing?
I don't know if any of that happened. Most of it's just been kind of an organic unraveling. I've definitely had some pretty intense moments. I had some time with psychedelics when I was younger. Mostly that was partying, but I had some pretty significant experiences.
Yeah.
And then since in some more recent healing, I've done it more specifically ritualistically. And actually doing that over the last few years, I actually had some pretty intense life events, and I ended up with PTSD about 4 years ago. And so I really was seeking out trying to heal that, and did a little bit of work with some shamans. Well, I would say people who practice shamanism and psychedelics, and that helped kind of open up some stuff. And then I worked with a Reiki healer, a friend of my older sister's in Oregon. And actually that session we did, after that, all of a sudden I started speaking light language and started channeling. So
wow. Yeah.
that as far as me doing what I'm doing now with that broadening, probably that experience or that series of experiences
Mhm.
that have opened up this other pathway or ability that I have or started to,
Yeah,
it's pretty significant, at least in me wanting to continue to do this. Although I was practicing sound therapy, prior to that. So most of it, I think, has just been kind of this unraveling,
totally.
different events than calling you. At least for me,
Yeah.
I've always been pretty self-seeking, and so calling me to look for, what else is there that I could be doing for myself and for others. I've always been I mean, I've always done work that helps others, so I think that's a
Yeah.
big motivation as well.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's just kind of been the direction I've gone. And I've just never been able to live in this world thinking that what we see is all there is. It just has never sat well with
Definitely.
me. So, so again, I think is mostly is who I am. And I've been able to mature enough. I was quite the wild child and party girl in my early years, and which was really fun. And I don't regret any of it. But, I finally kind of slowed down enough to where I could kind of corral that into something that feels authentic to me, I guess.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I before we dive into some of the like deeper questions,
Yeah.
you want to kind of give just like a little overview of what like a session might look with you and how you like techniques you use or any specific practice that you really enjoy?
Sure. Well, what I've studied, most of what I do, I would say, is pretty uniquely my own at this point. The sound therapy that I studied is called Integral Sound Therapy. It's an institute that's based in the UK, I believe, although I studied with a woman here in the US. And then I've just done a lot of my own deep dives. So as far as what I'm doing with sound therapy, it's loosely at least based in my study in that. So I use a lot of different instruments, excuse me, including my voice, again, because I'm channeling the voice. So I use anything from tuning forks to crystal bowls to gongs, chimes, rain sticks, drums, all of the above, right?
Mm.
And they all have a slightly different kind of mechanism of action for the way that I use it. I use it for slightly different things. Most of it at this point, I'm just kind of channeling how to use it. But
Yeah.
session with me, if you were just coming to get a sound session, for instance, I do what I call cleaning your field, so tuning your field. And that is based on Eileen McCusick's work, where we have a biofield, which is basically our energy field, auric field, lots of different ways you can describe it, that expands about 6 feet around us. And in some theories, the farther out you go, the closer to your birth or time in the womb.
Mhm.
And then the closer to your body, the more close it is to your experience. So,
Hmm.
so I kind of will sometimes kind of use it in that way. So I'm kind of going through somebody's energy field and using instruments to listen for dissonance. And then after that, then I go through and I do a bunch of clearing for dissonance or anything that feels a little sticky or heavy. And at this point, some of that will all often include light language and channeling coding to try to balance or reset anything, or especially get rid of anything that's not yours, right?
Yeah.
Energetically. So most of that at this point is kind of coming to me intuitively. I'm still listening, for what I hear in the instruments, but again, I'm kind of getting messages or getting intuitions as they come through for what might be happening with somebody, and doing my best just to follow that and not let my brain get in the way of the work, right? It's really easy to kind of try to overthink it.
Mhm.
Um, and so, those sessions, if we're just doing a sound session, usually lasts about an hour.
Okay.
And at minimum, the thing that I've found, I mean, I've had people leave here like that had a physical ailment and then they leave without it. That's pretty
Yeah.
extreme. That's not super common, but it's amazing when it happens. Most of the time, people just leave feeling different, lighter more than anything. Like oftentimes people are coming to me and they've got something really heavy that they're dealing with, and it's kind of nebulous or something that's hard to grasp onto,
Yeah.
like we always try to have some sort of like identification for an issue that we're having. And oftentimes those are energetic, and it's not something that we would even think that it's related to, right? So
Totally. Yeah.
you coming to a session with me is not a therapy session. It's coming like, whatever this is, let's try to clear it and balance some of that out. So you as a sovereign being who is totally capable of healing has more availability to, to that
Yeah.
avenue is
Yeah.
over the direction I go. Although sometimes they can, they can be quite like big and like earth shattering, most of the time they tend to just kind of peel away layers of
Yeah.
the ice, right? So
I could see that. That's cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I like that. The next few questions are kind of about like the demographics of Montana.
Okay.
Since I'm interviewing people from across the state, I kind of like to get a view of what you're experiencing out there.
Yeah.
So, has practicing in Montana or living in Montana deepened your spiritual practices or shaped it in some sort of way?
Um, I would say it absolutely has. I don't know if it's something that I can pinpoint specifically. I'm from Montana. I grew up here, just outside of Helena and Wolf Creek, and then I traveled and lived all over the place. And I lived in Seattle for 10 years before I moved back home. And so Seattle was a mecca for this kind of stuff. It was very readily available. I got a lot of exposure, and it was like normal, to to just be a weirdo, right?
Yeah.
Doing this kind of stuff in Seattle. And it totally fit me. Like Montana was very difficult for me growing up for that reason. As much as I love the beauty here, and I typically like love the people are, so down to earth. And I've always loved the state and loved being from here, but it was just so easy just to go there and be whoever, right? And then like if I had an interest in something, that's where I found most of this stuff, right? I became a massage therapist
Yeah.
there. I had a lot of my yoga experience there. My first experiences with sound therapy, Kundalini awakenings, all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So being in Montana has been, in general, it hasn't been as available. And so I would say the thing it's done for me most is I've had to then create that for myself because it's not like there's been a big community, although that's kind of growing exponentially now here, which is wonderful. I'm finding friends in the communities and, that's just become so awesome that that's now happening. But in general, the thing it's probably forced me to do the most is to go within, learn how to listen to my intuition more, kind of be quiet with myself, seek nature, which has been so much easier to do here than it was in this city. I live on the creek now, so I don't even have to go except for into my backyard and listen to the water, and get inspiration.
Mhm.
So I think that's probably the best way I can say it's described that for me, because it was a necessity for me to do that for myself because I didn't have those external sources to seek out.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's kind of what I'm trying to achieve with this podcast is like it is kind of an interesting slash challenging thing to get into in Montana.
Yeah, yeah.
And I want to like open that door and kind of see what's out. Yeah.
I love that. I was talking to my sister this morning. My sisters and I have all kind of been this way. I have some really close people in the community. Again, like I'm learning about this. And we were just talking because I've opened this place I call a modern temple, right? That's kind of the container I've created or continue to try to create here. And that, it's still kind of the slow burn for people to step into this world in Montana. And just because it can be scary and it's unfamiliar and a lot of people I think still feel like you'll be ostracized or somehow judged if you start to potentially voice the things that you might be exploring, in your inner self. And there's so much of that in this city, especially, this is mostly where I'm hanging out is in Helena.
Mhm.
But I keep getting more and more glimpses. And so I love that you're doing this and that more people are just doing whatever you can to offer. I'm offering the space for it, right? That's been what my thing is, to try and offer the space that feels like a safe place to come and explore this stuff.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's still just kind of like gaining the bareliest of traction. And I think people are just afraid because they don't really know,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for your service.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
So you kind of touched on it a little bit with talking about the creek, but do you have like specific energies or atmospheres like of nature that you love to pull into your own readings or interpretations of any kind?
Well, I've been using crystals more. And this sounds kind of crazy, but I have been doing a lot of channeling that where I'm at here in Helena is on one of the ley lines, it's on the crystal ley lines. And so I tap into that energetically quite a bit, just the crystal beds that we're on here and how powerful the quartz in Montana is for energetic healing and kind of spreading that and amplifying it.
Mhm.
So I would say more that it's more of the sense that I know that it's there than it is having to be in any one place. Montana just feels very powerful, kind of as a vortex in that way, kind of an energetic center. And because we aren't as inundated like the cities or the higher populated areas with electromagnetics and some of these other things, because we just don't have the population. I think that it just has a sense of purity to it still, right? And so much wild space that allows nature to just kind of be its thing. So that's kind of the sense I get. I do like to be out in nature, but it's not like, for some people, it's like a necessity. But again, like I said, I live right on the creek. We have property in Wolf Creek. It's not so much something I have to do anymore. I just kind of get that sense when I'm in meditation or doing whatever I'm doing.
Yeah,
Does that answer that question? I don't know if I went
it
on a
totally
tangent.
does. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So my next question is, it's kind of like my big favorite one to ask.
Okay.
And it's okay if you don't have a specific answer, but what do you think are the core elements of spiritual wellness and healing?
The core elements of spiritual wellness and healing are to be what I really think one of the main ones is to understand your sovereignty.
Mhm.
So to understand that who you are as an individual spirit, and to be willing to fall in love with that is an absolute necessity, which I'm still learning to do. Like it's not a thing that you have an end to, but
Yeah.
no matter what, I constantly come back to this understanding that there is this sense that we are all individuals having an individual experience, and every single aspect of that is beautiful and perfect. And at the same time, we're all connected. And that could be a very kind of impossible concept for some of us to grasp. But I think that that's really essential to spirituality in the sense that if you don't know that you are an individual and that you have the right and the permission to have whatever experience you're having, no amount or matter of teachings or perspectives or however you look at it is ever going to give you what you're seeking, right? Unless you trust that within
Yeah.
yourself and that you're able to follow that, and take what works for you and leave what doesn't, right? That to me, that's probably, at least as we are evolving, the thing that I consider to be one of the most important aspects.
Totally.
Because then otherwise you're just kind of following the flock, and you're just going to be, and oftentimes that doesn't work for you. In my early career in yoga, there were so many things about yoga that just gave me so much of what I needed. But then there were other things like what can I think happen with a lot of organized religion that would, because I'm not following it correctly, would cause me guilt because it didn't fit with me.
Yeah.
And that's a really simplified way of saying that. Like there's certain things that fit and there's certain things that don't. And maybe they fit now and then you evolve and then they don't fit anymore. So it's more about really being able to learn how to trust what your intuition is telling
Yeah.
you, right?
Yeah. And then that kind of leads me to like my next question here. How do you try to like guide individuals who are new to practices to trust their intuition and to look inside for reflection?
That is probably the main thing that I do usually. I offer, again, because part of what you're doing when you're doing energetic work is you're holding space, creating a container for people to be able to explore that for themselves.
Yeah.
So like I can offer guidance when it's needed or asked for, right? Like if somebody's having a difficult time or something's happening and they need somebody to hold their hand or anything of that, of course I can do that, and I want to do that.
Yeah.
But in general, as I guide people through meditations, I find that it just kind of naturally comes to me where I'm trying to use language and visualization, and sound, in ways to be able to help kind of open up the framework for people to be able to discover that within themselves, rather than me trying to say, here's one way to do it, or here's how to do it.
Yeah.
I might use some of these techniques like breath work, and I do a lot of visualization and meditation along with the sound. I might use some of those things because I know how helpful they are, because we use our subconscious in that way, right? So
Yeah.
I use those tools, but they're more of like a framework, sort of laying down a foundation so people can discover that within themselves. And of course, if they ask, then I'll give, if somebody asks me and I'm channeling, especially, it's only if they ask me and give me permission that I will give them something a little bit more specific.
Yeah.
Or if it comes really strongly, I'll say, hey, can I offer this to you? But for the most part, that's kind of the way I do it, because I really believe that we all have that within ourselves. And really the way that we heal and the way that we all move forward is to discover that, right? It's not
Totally.
any one technique. There's nothing I can say to somebody, because all I know is I'm feeling energy and I'm working with it, right? That's as far as I can really say for what I know I'm doing at this point. But that's really kind of the world that I see, is like this kind of world of people dancing around like fairies that love themselves. And so we're not hurting anybody else, and we're not doing any unnecessary BS because we know ourselves in that way, right? So that's kind of my ultimate goal, for the work I do, really.
Yeah, that's cool. So while you do that work for others and you open up their energy channels, help clear those things, how do you find a balance between like maintaining your own energy practices and then helping others?
I've actually have always been pretty good at it, I would say. I've never had children, right? I've never been married. So I've not had these things that a lot of people have, these kind of occurrences or experiences in life that can tend to pull you out of yourself in that way.
Yeah.
So I think that in some ways I just kind of naturally do it. I do art, and so my art is my way of just kind of diving into my own world and being quiet with myself and not allowing all this other stuff to come through, which can be kind of overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's probably the main thing I do nowadays. That's been the last few years that I've really dove into that. But that's the main thing I do for myself. I think no matter what, you have to kind of just do things that are just for you, and whatever it is that like is your passion is, what you should follow. Although all this work is also my passion. That's the one that's like just for me, right?
Yeah. Do you have a specific memory, like either with a client or with yourself, of like energy cleansing or healing that you just kind of like refer back to or find special?
There's literally so many of them. Like I'm constantly in awe. I've just had some of the most wild experiences.
Yeah.
Um, these things that you just don't even think can be real, and then it happens. It's just kind of mind-boggling. Like I've had experiences again where I've had a client say to me, like, "Oh my God, I went away and this thing was gone," and I'm like, "Well, that's so awesome," I had a really wild experience, and she may even watch this podcast, so it'll be fun. She's a friend of mine, but I was doing, this is like unreal, but it was so cool. We were in my studio here, and there was a big storm brewing outside, and you could hear it all because we're in downtown Helena. So it was like it was loud, and you can probably tell by how echoey it is in here. But I could hear the storm brewing. We talked a bunch before I got her on the table, and when I start my sessions, I always tap in, and we call in, guides and creators, and I always hit a bowl. Usually is the first thing I hit. And right as I hit the bowl, this huge, like thunder that just rumbled hit. And I knew it was going to be big. And we both felt like we were both in this other time, like where we were in the cabin and there was a storm, and I had done this before, like in another life, and we could feel wind. There's no way you can feel wind inside our studio. And so afterward, we were just like, she had to open her eyes in the middle of it because she couldn't believe what was happening, And it was like the elements of this other time, and we were reliving this healing session or whatever we were doing. It was wild. There's, when you talk about magic, like it was magical. It was just so cool. And I was just kind of like giddy the whole time because it was just so fun,
Yeah.
And I can't recall if she had any specific things. You know, she's also a healer and kind of on a journey herself, and there's always stuff going on. If there was anything specific that happened after that for her, but the event itself was
Yeah.
so fun. Like, it was just so cool, right? So as far as this kind of like big event, that was a really cool one. But I have amazing thing happen, literally happen all the time.
Which makes sense.
Not coincidences. I'll get some sort of message or something come through that I'm watching on Facebook, and then my client will come in and they'll say the exact same thing that I just watched. I just don't think there's any such thing anymore. And it just keeps kind of clearing, the universe just keeps showing me that, like, oh, it really is all connected, and all of it's here for our benefit, really, if we can see it. Right. So
Yeah. That's
doesn't
really cool.
always easy. I'm not sugarcoating it at all.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
What would you say that like your biggest lesson or insight is that you've gained throughout the work you've like had with other people?
It is a continual process for me, actually, to just learn how we're all having a human experience, and I'm constantly being reminded just to let go of my judgment and my biases about the world, about people, about myself,
Yeah.
and that has been probably the most perpetual theme throughout all the work I've done, in this kind of work with massage and everything else.
Yeah.
Is just think every time I know something, I don't really know it, right? Something else kind of comes at me that's like wakes me up out of my kind of ego stupor that I think I know something, right?
Yeah.
And that's such a gift. It's probably on a personal level the reason why I continue to do this, even though it can be kind of hard sometimes.
Yeah.
As a career, especially. But I just feel like that's probably for one of my biggest personal reasons for continuing to do it for my own healing as well. Every time I'm working with other people, I try to open up to what are the lessons that I'm also learning, with this. So
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. So kind of in my last few questions here, if you were to give a piece of advice to someone starting their spiritual journey, what would that be for them?
I mean, I think you have to just go with whatever is calling to you, right?
Yeah.
So, again, do your best not to try and let other people convince you of what you should or shouldn't be doing. Do what is calling to you. And even if it doesn't seem quote unquote spiritual, like maybe you're going to go and do like swing dancing or something, and that's your first step into it, right? There are so many things that we don't consider spiritual that are the universe's way, right? This is God's way of telling you this is what's meant for you. Here's your first stepping stone.
Yeah.
And it really is about just be afraid and do it anyway, because we all are afraid of doing things that we, right, have never done before. That's just being afraid is part of being human.
Totally.
And I constantly remind myself, like, be afraid and do it anyway. And, it's not like be afraid and do it anyway, like jump off a cliff and die. I mean, you have an inner discernment, and you just have to try to have that.
Yeah.
So even though some things are kind of scary and uncomfortable, stepping into that discomfort is going to be your greatest asset once you do it. That has always been the case for me, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah. Where do you see your journey or business kind of going in the next few years?
That is a really interesting question. When I try to see the future or what I'm trying to do with all this, it is like a complete blank, quite honestly. I feel like there is so much potential for so many different avenues for it to go. When I first thought about opening the studio, I shouldn't even say I thought about it. I literally just got the calling to do it because I wasn't necessarily looking for another endeavor that takes a lot of my time and energy. In my mind, I'm like, that's a lot of work. But I wasn't really looking for that. But I got the call to do it. And I think there's a lot of potential, for this place to kind of grow into a space where others can just use it for that, which would be wonderful. I see myself potentially doing more kind of digital online stuff. I'd like to offer some of the things that I do in a digital format to people. I'm still kind of just figuring that out, and I have no idea what that's going to look like. I continue to get the message that I should be channeling light language more, messages for people. And, quite honestly, that's a little uncomfortable. It just seems like so woo woo and out there. And, but it also seems so right. So there's like
Yeah.
kind of that middle place that I'm in with it. And I'm just, like probably I will be doing it at some point because I keep getting I
Yeah.
keep hearing it. Like I need to be doing that. And I don't know where that's going to go. I at a certain point, you have to just get out of the way and let the work happen, really. And so, again, that's like every day you're working on that, right? Because we all have ego and we all have things we want and we all have big dreams and all this stuff, right? So it's about balancing that. So that's kind of what has been coming to me, but I every time I think about it, it's like something new comes up. So I actually think we're in a really beautiful, ripe time for so many people to start to discover this, and
Yes.
for themselves. And perhaps there's going to be a lot more community collaboration, which I would love, because it has been until recently kind of a lonely endeavor,
Yeah.
for all of us that do this. So I see so much potential in so many directions, and I just am trying to be open to whatever that is.
Totally. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. Well, my last question for you, is there anything I like haven't touched on that you want to mention?
Anything that you haven't touched on that I want to mention? Um, Nothing's coming to mind
Yeah.
specifically. I think you have a pretty comprehensive questionnaire that you've got. The only thing I would say is that I think one of the things that may be helpful for your audience, if whoever's listening, is that for us to kind of demystify the whole idea of spirituality being only in the esoteric arts or really witchy stuff, or um, crystals and yoga and meditation, because it's really not. It's literally in the everyday practice of just being a good human, really.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and what that is to you. So a lot of what I teach is about, and what I'm continuing to learn, in my own meditations, is about learning to come from our heart instead of our head so much.
Mhm.
And some people actually have that naturally, and like, not to be judgy or anything, but like live in a trailer and, work at a grocery store and don't do any of this stuff. And they're naturally more loving and beautiful and spiritual without any of these practices,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
they're there to help us. And a lot of these have come from ancient cultures and ancient times because they knew these things, and they're all very helpful. And I find them super fun and magical. But it doesn't have to be this thing that if you don't do that, it means you're not spiritual, because I think
Yeah.
that's BS, really. It's like,
Yep.
how much are you living from the heart? How much are you learning to be open to yourself and others' experiences? And if that's your premise of the way you live, you've probably kind of dialed in 90% of what spirituality is, really.
Yeah. No, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that is what I'm hoping to try and do, is just spread awareness of the fact that just because you practice spirituality, you're not like a witch or the devil. It's not some scary practice. It could be 10 minutes in the morning that you're meditating and thinking about how you're feeling and what you're going through, stuff like that.
Well, and that's the other thing, is a lot of these things that some of us do, there has been, it has been kind of an adulteration by certain institutions of what these things are, to seem like they're evil.
Yep.
And I have definitely got some of that feedback before, and I know it to be the opposite, right? And so I think that some of it is just doing our best to be open to all of these, to open to whatever this is, and to recognize if this is helping somebody, and if they're a good person, right? Like,
Yeah.
we should just leave it at that. And if other people are finding solace and healing in some of these, super woo-woo things, then you should be happy for them, and we can let some of this other stuff that really is just kind of fodder, that's been, and muck, that's been kind of spread across some of these practices, because there's not any practice can be used for not good, right? And that's the
Yep.
whole thing. And that's
Yeah.
why I think it's important to discern, because you could easily do the kind of things I'm doing and manipulate people, right? You could.
Yeah.
Very important to me that I don't. And this is why I prefer to guide people on their own journey rather than tell them what to do, because I do my best not to let my biases infiltrate their experiences, right?
Yeah,
Because
totally.
so yeah, I think it's starting to kind of happen. More and more people that I know are, again, don't be afraid of it, listen to your intuition and everything's going to be fine.
Yeah.
And even better, right?
True. Yeah. Well, those are all the questions I have for you today.
Awesome.
Yeah. I just want to thank you again for joining me today on this podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, Logan. This was really fun.
Of course. Yeah. Cool. Well, have a great rest of your day.
You too. I'll send you some stuff that you can use on your website if you want.
Yes, please do. Yes.
Sounds good. Take
Awesome.
care.
Thank you. Bye bye.